Muted Heart. Written exclusively for Romance Audiobooks-Love. Copyright 2025. All rights reserved. Brandon has sworn off love after his mate's betrayal nearly destroyed him. He tells himself he's only helping Mylah heal because it's his duty as alpha. But when her silent strength begins to mend the pieces of his shattered heart, he realizes some bonds run deeper than words. Just as Mylah begins to trust again, an invitation arrives that threatens everything. A mating ceremony where Brandon will face his past, and Mylah will discover if she's his future or just another broken thing he's trying to fix. In a world where the strongest wolves roar the loudest, sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that chooses when to break its silence. Chapter 1. Defeat clung to the clearing like mist. It was a perfume he knew well. Brandon stood in his wolf form, his massive paws planted in the churned mud. Each claw was a dark, curved knife. His fur, the color of midnight, was spattered with blood. None of it his own. He'd torn through several pack members who dared defy him and his pack. They were fools. They thought numbers meant strength. They learned their lesson in pieces. The conquered alpha of the Crescent Shadow Pack knelt before him, spine bowed, neck bared in the ultimate gesture of submission. The moonlight caught the sweat on his skin. He smelled of terror, a sour, rotten stench. This was the cost of weakness, the price for overreaching, for testing the borders of a territory that was not his. Behind the groveling alpha stood 5 pack members, a pathetic honor guard, 4 males shaking like autumn leaves. Their eyes darted everywhere but to him. His gaze settled on the female behind the tallest male, barely a woman full. She was small, so small the night threatened to swallow her whole. Her hair was a dark, tangled mess. Pale skin showed through the grime on her face. She was wrapped in a thin, shapeless dress that did little to ward off the night's chill. Brandon's nostrils flared. The scent of her was different. Beneath the dirt and the fear of those around her, she smelled of rain-soaked earth, of winter stillness. She did not smell like them. The crescent shadows carried the scent of pine and decay. She was other. The rival alpha sensed the shift in Brandon's gaze. His voice cracked as he spoke. She's an offering. A trembling hand lifted. The Omega was dragged forward, shoved to her knees without a protest. A blood price. For our transgression. Brandon remained silent. He let the alpha stew in his own terror, let him fill the quiet with his cowardice, until a stain appeared on his trousers. The alpha's words tumbled out, a desperate flood. We found her on the edge of our territory, near the human lands. She's Omega, untouched, silent. The word hung in the air. Omega, the lowest rank, a vessel for the pack's needs, a punching bag for their frustrations. And this one was silent, a broken toy. Brandon stepped forward. The movement was fluid, a ripple of power beneath muscle and bone. Mid-stride, he shifted. Bones snapped, a rapid-fire cracking that echoed in the clearing. They broke and reformed, lengthened. Fur retracted into skin. His human form loomed over the kneeling alpha and the small Omega. He was blood-smeared and stark under the full moon, sights and sounds muted, less primal. But the sense of blood and fear remained. Why, her. His voice was a low growl, the last echo of the wolf. The alpha flinched. He did not look up. His gaze was fixed on Brandon's bare, muddy feet. She has no claim, no name, no one to protest her loss, no one to miss her, no one to avenge her. She was disposable, the perfect sacrifice. Rage, cold and sharp, coiled in Brandon's gut. He had killed for land, for dominance, for the safety of his pack. He did not kill for sport. He did not trade in flesh. His gaze flicked to the Omega again. He expected to see tears, hysteria, the pleading terror he saw in the eyes of prey just before the end. He saw none of it. Her stillness was absolute, a challenge without words. He stalked toward her, the mud sucking at his feet. The 4 male wolves behind her tensed. One took a half-step forward, a foolish flicker of possessiveness. Brandon's eyes snapped to him. A low snarl vibrated in his chest. The wolf froze, lowered his head. Brandon stopped a few inches from the Omega. Her eyes followed him. They were wide and silver. Not blue, not gray. Silver, like the moon trapped in 2 perfect circles. But unlike the moon, they were blank. Flat. He saw his reflection in them, a bloody, naked monster. She did not flinch from the sight. She simply watched. "What's your name?" he asked. The words were softer than he intended. She said nothing. Her jaw remained set. Her lips, a pale, thin line. The cowering alpha dared a glance upward. She wrote her name as Mylah. Brandon didn't respond. His gaze dropped to the Omega still kneeling in the mud. Silent, motionless, not even flinching. A scar curled beneath her jawline. It was a thin white line against her pale skin. Old, healed over many, many times. It looked like a collar had been worn too long, too tight. The thought was a spark to dry tinder. A brand, a chain. Someone had tried to own her, to break her. Brandon's mouth tightened into a grim line. He looked back at the kneeling alpha. The man's pathetic ploy was clear. He offered a broken thing, assuming Brandon's nature was as foul as his own, assuming he would take the Omega and use her, that he would rut her like a mindless animal to celebrate his victory. The insult was as great as the border challenge itself. His wolf stirred beneath his skin, ready in an instant to rip the rival alpha's throat out for the suggestion. Clenching his jaw, Brandon pulled his attention from the groveling fool on the ground, snapping his gaze back to the offering, to the Omega. She was watching him. Her wide silver eyes were fixed on his face with an intensity that rivaled his own. For a split second, the world narrowed to the space between them. It was only when his eyes fully met hers that her mask finally cracked. The Omega dropped her gaze. She lowered her head, the dark curtain of her hair hiding her face. It was not in submission. He had seen submission. This was different. Her shoulders did not slump. Her spine did not bow. Her silence was a weapon. Her stillness, a shield. Brandon felt a strange, unwelcome pull. A need to see those silver eyes again. A need to shatter that control. A need to protect it. What was he thinking? He needed no woman, no mate. They were all the same. Wily creatures meant to tempt and tease. He turned his back on her, on all of them. It was the ultimate display of dominance. To show no fear of a blade found his back. "I accept your offering." Against every instinct screaming at him to walk away, to leave her to whatever fate awaited her with these fools, he found himself speaking the words that would seal both their fates. He started walking toward the edge of the clearing, toward the path that led back to his own territory. He did not look back to see if she followed. He did not need to. He listened. He heard the collective sigh of relief from the crescent shadow wolves. They were glad to be rid of her, glad to be alive. He heard the rustle of the Omega's thin dress, the soft, hesitant squelch of a bare foot in mud. Then another. She was following. A new scent touched the air, faint, almost imperceptible beneath the blood and the fear. It came from her. It was the smell of a choice being made, the smell of a future he had just stolen or saved. He did not yet know which. Chapter 2. The dirt was a damp, greedy cold that seeped through the thin fabric of her dress, but she didn't shift. Shifting was a luxury, a sign that comfort was an option. For her, it had never been. She had learned stillness in the cold stone kitchen of her stepmother's house, learned it from the sharp crack of a wooden spoon across her knuckles when she moved too slowly, spoke too loudly, or dared to rest when there was work to be done. The cold was just a fact, like the hunger in her belly, the ache in her bones. She learned she was a piece of meat to be sacrificed after her father's death. First, by her stepmother, who saw her as nothing more than unpaid labor. Then by the Crescent Shadow Pack, who claimed her as she gathered berries in the forest. She understood the transaction. Her value was measured in what she could endure. Mylah kept her eyes fixed on the booted feet of the alpha before her. Focus on the small. Survive the large. Though there was nothing small about him. Against her will, her gaze climbed. Dark hair, damp with sweat and blood, clung to his temples. Broad shoulders crowded with muscle, every line carved with purpose. Strange black runes inked across his chest and winding down both arms, glowing faintly in the moonlight, making them living things. He was twice her height, 3 times her size, brutality wrapped in skin. His hands looked big enough to crush her throat with a twitch, yet steady enough to hold her still as if she were made of glass. Power radiated from him, dangerous and magnetic, and her body betrayed her with a pulse of heat low in her stomach. That cursed omega pull honed from instinct, that primal, humiliating reaction which constantly screamed, submit, breed, belong when faced with an alpha's power. Her mind recoiled from it. Her body, the traitor, leaned into it. She hated it. Hated this weakness that was woven into her bones. She fought it down, a silent, desperate battle waged in the confines of her own skin. They walked on. Her feet protested the sharp stones and sucking cold. No one offered her warm clothing like they had the alpha. Shoes for her feet. She bared the discomfort, not making a sound. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows and damp air. Mist clung to the ground, swallowing their ankles. It was cold. A deep, penetrating cold that made her teeth ache. She was watched, not by the alpha, who strode ahead as if he were alone, but by the guard who walked beside her. His name was Ralph, she learned from the grunts he exchanged with the others. His presence was a constant, oppressive weight, sneer permanently etched onto his lips. He saw her as filth, a spoil of war no better than a discarded rag. Another guard, Jurgen, fell into step on her other side. He was younger, with a cruel spark in his eyes. The 2 guards began to talk, their voices hushed from the others around him, but not from her. Jurgen nudged Ralph with his elbow. 10 silver says she doesn't last the month. Ralph grunted, his eyes still fixed on Mylah's profile. The odds stink. The last one he brought back, the sturdy slave from the southern ridge, she was dead within a week. His slave, dead. Mylah's breath hitched. Her thoughts swam. Did he kill her? Her stomach turned to ice. She forced her legs to keep moving. Jurgen chuckled. A low, nasty sound. This one's much smaller. Look at her. A strong wind could snap her in 2. He'll break her before the next full moon. His sneer grew wider. He likes to break them. He'll try. Ralph's voice was a low growl, but there's nothing there to break. She's already hollow. He'll get bored, toss her to the pack. The image flashed in her mind. a horrifying, visceral nightmare. She squeezed her eyes shut for a second, then forced them open. The trees swam before her. The ground tilted. She would not faint. She would not give them the satisfaction. The fog thickened, swirling around them like ghosts. Then he was there. The Alpha. Brandon. He appeared as if summoned from the fog itself, standing directly in their path. His face was a mask of thunder. The guards fell silent instantly. Jurgen's smirk vanished. Ralph took a half-step back. Brandon's eyes were not on them. They were on her, a piercing, analytical gaze that stripped her bare. "She's not for mating." He snapped the words. Each one a whip crack in the tense silence. The guards' heads jerked up in surprise. Brandon's eyes were chips of ice. "As long as she remains silent, she may stay." He gave her a dismissive glance, then strode away, his words carrying on the wind. "I will not have a chattering crow in my home." The words hit hard. He was not saying she was strong for her silence. He was saying her silence was her only redeeming quality, the only thing that made her bearable. It was a profound rejection, not just of her body, but of her very essence. He was declaring her worthless for the one thing alphas were supposed to value in an omega. He was casting her aside before he had even truly claimed her. If silence was what he wanted, she could give him that. She knew how to be quiet. Oh, she knew. Her stepmother had demanded it from the moment her father's body was cold in the ground. "Speak when spoken to, child. Your voice grates on my nerves." The memory rose, unbidden and sharp. Years of tiptoeing through her own home, of swallowing words until they turned to poison in her throat, of learning that her thoughts and feelings were burdens no one wanted to bear. This new alpha, this Brandon, saw her silence not as a scar, but as a convenience, a domestic utility. The humiliation of it burned hotter than an iron pulled from the fire. She dropped her gaze to the forest floor. The rejection settled in her bones, a familiar, heavy weight. She was not worthy, not even enough to be broken. That night they made a crude camp. A fire was built. Meat was passed around on sticks. She was given nothing. She sat apart by the base of a large oak tree, hugging her knees to her chest for warmth. The guards, Ralph and Jurgen, ate their fill, casting dark looks her way. Brandon sat across the fire, sharpening a long, wicked-looking knife. He never looked at her. The next morning was bright, but still bitterly cold. Though she was left alone, she had not slept. Instead, she watched the stars move across the sky, waited all night for her punishment to come, for a guard to be sent over, for the Alpha himself to claim his prize. She had braced for it, her body a knot of tension, her mind a whirlwind of terror. Nothing but the snores of wolves reached her ears, the deep, rumbling sounds of sleep from the brutes who now owned her life. It was a maddening sound, the sound of their peace while she lived in torment. Mylah was exhausted when the sun broke over the mountains, a deep, soul-crushing weariness that made her limbs feel like lead. They started walking again as soon as the light was strong enough to see the path, a grueling, unforgiving pace. Her empty stomach cramped. Her bare feet grew raw, bleeding from sharp stones and twigs. They healed and bled again. She wouldn't beg for a slower pace. She wouldn't fall into the dirt with the weariness she felt in her bones. A part of her, the broken part, wanted to. It wanted to lie down and let the forest take her. But another part, a small, stubborn ember deep inside, refused. She would keep moving. She would put one foot in front of the other until her legs gave out. She would be silent. She would be useful. She would do whatever it took to survive. They saw her as a fragile thing, a hollow wolf already broken. They were wrong. That evening, they reached his home. The forest thinned abruptly, opening onto a clearing. The two guards, Ralph and Jurgen, stopped at the tree line. They gave her one last look of contempt, then turned and melted back into the shadows without a word. She was alone with him. The air grew heavy with a sudden, suffocating intimacy, and the fine hairs on her arms stood on end. Come. It was the first time he'd spoken to her in 2 days, and it was the command of a master to a slave. He moved, and she caught sight of his home. Surely this must be some mistake, she thought to herself. His home was large, true, but weeds choked the yard. The fence yawned, half up, half down. The windows didn't wink in the fading light. Instead, they were blind with grime. Cobwebs clung to the eaves, whispering in the wind. The place did not look like the den of a wealthy, conquering alpha. No, it was the home of a ghost. He led her inside. The heavy wooden door groaned on its hinges. The interior, dark and cold, hung stagnant with the smell of dust, old leather, and stale wood smoke. A fine layer of grime covered every surface. The great stone hearth was swept clean, but it was black and empty, a cold heart in a cold house. He pointed to a small room off the main living space, a simple opening with a tattered curtain for a door. That will be yours. The words were flat, devoid of welcome or threat. She turned slowly, her bare feet silent on the dusty floorboards. Her pulse raced, but her face remained a placid mask. She looked at him in question as his scent of spice and power overwhelmed her senses. She waited for the demand, the command, the price for the room, for her life. This was the part she knew, the part where the debt was called due. He hesitated, his jaw tight as he looked from her face to the simple room and back again. For a flicker of a moment, the alpha seemed uncertain. Then his expression hardened, the brief vulnerability gone. He turned and walked away, his heavy boots echoing in the cavernous room, leaving her standing alone in the doorway. She must have drifted off on the small but surprisingly comfortable bed, because the soft scrape of wood against stone jolted her awake. When she peered beyond the curtain, a wooden tray waited on the floor outside her room. Cold roasted meat, hard bread, and a wooden cup of milk. Beside it sat a bucket of warm water with a rough cloth and a fresh linen shift folded neatly on top. It was the meal of a servant, practical, impersonal, and the best meal she'd ever had. The meat was real, not the scraps and gristle her stepmother had thrown her way when she remembered to feed her at all. The bread, though hard, was made from proper grain, not the moldy crusts she'd learned to soften in whatever water she could find. And the milk, sweet, rich, still faintly warm, was a luxury she hadn't tasted since her father's death. At her stepmother's house, she'd survived on thin gruel and kitchen leavings, eating standing up over the wash basin like the family dog. He had prepared this meal, set it outside her door with care, expected her to eat it. The simple act of being fed without having to beg or steal or wait for scraps made her throat tight with an emotion she couldn't name. That night, she curled beneath the single wool blanket, the plain fabric a luxury against her skin. She stared at the rough-hewn planks of the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her. She thought of her stepmother's house, of cold stone floors and colder words, of sleeping in the kitchen corner on a thin pallet that reeked of grease and old food. Worthless girl. Her stepmother's voice echoed in her memory, sharp as winter wind. Your father should have arranged a mate for you, instead of leaving me with his burden. She closed her eyes tight, forcing the memory down, blocked it out, but her hand drifted to her throat, her fingers tracing the faded, puckered line of the scar there, the ghost of the collar her stepmother had forced her to wear. Brandon hadn't tried to touch her, hadn't even raised his voice. He had given her a room, food, and then left her in peace. Maybe that was worse. The silence in her stepmother's house had been filled with simmering resentment and barely contained disgust, a constant reminder that she was unwanted, a mouth to feed that gave nothing back. This silence was unknown territory without landmarks or warnings. She didn't know what to make of it, and she feared the fall more than any blow. Chapter 3. She had woken not from a noise, but from the lack of one. There was no rattling cage door, no heavy footfalls outside a barred slit. There was only the quiet hum of a house breathing around her, and the distant, lonely cry of a hawk. For a long, disoriented moment, she didn't know where she was. The blanket was wool, not threadbare straw. The air smelled of pine and cold stone, not her own fear. Then it returned. The memory of the journey, the Alpha's cold declaration, the neglected house that was now her prison. Her body tensed, coiling with an instinct for survival that sleep had momentarily dulled. She sat up, listening. The house was not silent. She could hear the slow, steady rhythm of a large body moving in the main room, the scrape of a boot on stone, the soft clink of metal. He was awake. He was near. Her stomach was a hollow ache, but she ignored it. Hunger was a constant, familiar companion. She rose from the narrow bed, her movements fluid and silent, a habit born from years of avoiding notice. The linen shift she'd been given was clean, night and day to the rags she'd worn for so long. It felt strange against her skin. Too soft. Too kind. Brandon said nothing as he tossed her a coat from the hallway peg and pointed to a pair of boots made from soft but sturdy leather. He didn't wait for her, only gestured for her to follow. The coat was heavy, made of thick wool and lined with rabbit fur. It smelled of him, that potent, overwhelming scent of forest and power. It should have been suffocating. Instead, it was warm. A dangerous, seductive warmth that promised a comfort she'd be stupid to believe in. "I have business in the village," he said, his deep voice rumbling through her. "You will follow me." Mylah obeyed wordlessly, clutching the fabric around her shoulders and slipping into the boots before stepping outside. The cold morning air bit at her cheeks, but the coat was a shield against the worst of it. The path was uneven, worn by years of footsteps and paws, lined with ancient trees that whispered words only the wind could understand. She trailed him down the slope toward the village square, her booted feet protected against the cold, damp earth. She kept her distance, a careful 3 paces behind, close enough to obey, not quite far enough to run. Not that she could outrun him. His long legs would eat the distance she'd gained in a matter of seconds. And then, she dared not think of what he would do. Mylah focused instead on the quaint, well-kept houses with neat, colorful gardens and shining windows. Even at the early hour, smoke curled from their stone chimneys in lazy gray ribbons. As they drew closer to the heart of the village, the sounds of life began to reach her. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of an axe splitting wood, the low murmur of voices. And then, children's laughter spilled into the open air, bright and sharp and painfully beautiful. Pack members moved between stalls in an open-air market, exchanging goods and news like a well-oiled machine. Mylah kept her eyes low. Her world shrank to the cracked leather of his boots and the muddy ground before her. The last time she'd been in a bustling village full of people, she'd made a terrible mistake. She had been barely 14, sent to the market for flour and salt. The traveling performers had set up in the square, a puppet show with colorful wooden figures dancing on strings. For a few precious moments, she'd forgotten herself, forgotten her stepmother's endless list of chores and bitter words. She'd stopped to watch, enchanted by the tiny knight wooing his lady love, her face lit with wonder she hadn't felt since her father's death. The joy had lasted perhaps 5 minutes. Her stepmother had found her there, transfixed by the simple magic of the performance. The woman's voice had cut through the crowd like a blade. "There she is! My worthless stepdaughter, wasting time on foolishness while there's work to be done." Every head had turned. Every eye had fixed on Mylah as her stepmother dragged her through the square by her ear, continuing her tirade for all to hear. Dreaming like the useless girl she is instead of earning her keep. The humiliation had burned worse than any blow from her wooden spoon. The way the other villagers had stared, some with pity, others with the satisfied look of those witnessing someone else's shame. She'd never return to that village, never again let herself be caught dreaming of a life filled with love and laughter. Still, this time, her captivity was different. She wasn't a prisoner, but she wasn't free either. Her status was ambiguous, a terrifying gray space where the rules were unknown. She was his, that much was clear. But what did that mean? He had rejected her as a mate, yet he had given her a room, a coat, boots. He had not laid a hand on her. The contradictions were a maze in her mind, every path leading to a new kind of danger. She watched him. She had to. Understanding the predator was the key to surviving him. The alpha moved through his people like an arrow, sharp, direct, but respected. Men, broad-shouldered and battle-hardened from wars she could only imagine, nodded at him, a clear acknowledgement of his authority, not a cowed submission. Women offered shy greetings from behind their stalls of herbs and bread, their eyes holding a warmth that startled her. A pair of wolf pups, no older than 5 winters, squealed his name and darted through his legs, tumbling in the dirt. He growled, low and warning, the sound of a patient wolf telling its young to mind their manners. But as the pups scrambled away, giggling, he reached down without breaking stride and ruffled the smaller one's hair when he thought no one was looking. Mylah saw it. The half-smile that flickered across his features like sunlight through storm clouds, vanishing as quick as a mouse with stolen cheese. Her steps slowed. Her breath caught in her throat. That small, unguarded gesture did more to unravel her than any threat could have. It was a glimpse of the man beneath the alpha, the wolf beneath the runes. She was still watching him, mesmerized by this contradiction, when he stopped at a fruit vendor's stall. The woman behind the wooden table beamed at him, her weathered hands selecting the ripest apples from her display. Mylah turned away, letting her gaze drift over the market coming alive around them, children chasing each other between stalls, their laughter bright as silver bells, women haggling good-naturedly over winter vegetables, men sharing news and ale. For a moment she forgot where she was, forgot what she was. The normalcy of it all was intoxicating, a glimpse of a world where people lived without fear, where kindness wasn't a trap waiting to spring. Just like she'd forgotten herself all those times before. When she turned back, his hand was there, close to her face, an apple resting on his palm like an offering. The world shattered. It was not a small, shy movement. It was a profound, violent recoil, a full-body rejection that sent her stumbling backward. Her mind screamed no, but her body was already lost to the past, hijacked by memory and terror. Her breath seized. The world narrowed to a pinprick of horror. The scent of crisp autumn apples vanished, replaced by the smell of her stepmother's kitchen and the phantom sting across her backside. For one blinding, horrifying second, it was not Brandon standing before her. It was her stepmother, holding out a honey cake with that false, sweet smile. "Here, child. You've worked so hard today." And Mylah, foolish and hopeful, had always taken the bait, had always believed, for just one shining moment, that perhaps this time the kindness was real. The wooden spoon had always followed, sharp and sudden across her legs, her back, wherever her stepmother could reach. Did you think you deserved that? Did you think yourself special? The words echoing with each blow. Kindness has a price, girl. Everything has a price. The hope that had begun to build inside her, fragile as spider silk, crumbled to ash. She readied herself for the blow that always followed, eyes squeezed shut, every muscle tensed for impact. Why couldn't she remember? Why did she always forget that kindness from others came with a cost she couldn't afford to pay? A tear she hadn't meant to shed, hadn't known was coming, slipped down her cheek. When the world rushed back in, the silence was deafening. The vendor's eyes were wide with shock. A woman nearby had stopped mid-conversation, her hand pressed over her mouth. Children who had been playing froze, sensing the sudden shift in the air. And him. When she finally dared to look up, his expression had changed completely. That guarded, hard-set line of his jaw had cracked. The mask of indifference was gone, shattered by her reaction like glass against stone. Something raw and volatile flickered in his dark eyes. Shock, confusion, and something else she couldn't name. Something that looked dangerously close to pain. It was as if she'd struck a nerve he didn't know he had, exposing a piece of him he kept buried beneath layers of authority and control. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, she felt he wasn't just seeing a silent Omega or a spoil of war. He was seeing the wounds, the scars that went deeper than skin. I wasn't going to hurt you. The words were rough, low, grated out as if it hurt him to say them. It wasn't a command or a casual statement. It was a raw, guttural promise torn from somewhere deep inside him, bleeding honesty. She couldn't speak. The words were trapped behind the lump of fear lodged in her throat like a stone. She gave a single, jerky nod. Her hand was shaking as she reached out again, her fingers brushing his. The contact was electric, a jolt of unexpected warmth against her cold skin. She took the apple, her grip too tight, her knuckles white with the effort of not dropping it. She raised it to her lips and bit into it without tasting it. The flesh was crisp and sweet, but all she could taste was ash and the salt of her own tears. He turned away, but he didn't walk as fast after that. He adjusted his pace to hers, a silent, unwilling concession that spoke louder than words. Chapter 4. She was still silent, but far from invisible. Brandon had spent most of his life in noise. The clash of steel, the roar of battle, the endless demands of ruling a pack that stretched across 3 mountain valleys. His house, usually quiet out of necessity, was now something else entirely. Mylah. Within a week, she had transformed his neglected home. He hadn't asked her to. He'd expected her to rest, maybe venture into the village when her strength returned. Instead, he'd come home from morning patrol to find her on her hands and knees, scrubbing years of grime from the stone hearth, a look of determination that bordered on fierce on her face. The windows, clouded with dust and neglect, caught the morning light and threw it in golden squares across the wooden floors that gleamed with fresh oil and care, bedding washed and sun-dried, the cobwebs that had claimed the corners like battle banners, gone. Even the air smelled different, clean, alive. She moved quietly through the rooms, not demanding, not asking permission, just existing. A ghost made flesh that breathed life back into dark and dirty spaces. His wolf stirred every time he caught her scent. Pine soap and something indefinably her, that rain-soaked earth smell that had marked her as different from the first moment. It was everywhere, in his kitchen, his sitting room, threading through the very walls until his entire home carried traces of her presence. It should have felt like an invasion. Instead, it felt like coming home. She swept the kitchen in the mornings, movements slow and methodical. She never rushed, never seemed anxious to finish. There was something almost meditative in the way she worked, as if the simple act of making things clean brought her a peace he didn't understand. But what rattled him more than how she'd claimed his space without claiming anything at all was the music. It started as humming, low, almost under her breath, when she thought she was alone. Soft melodies. No words, just fragments of sound that drifted through the house like morning mist. Sweet and haunting and utterly unexpected from a woman who never spoke. The first time he'd heard it, he'd stopped dead in the doorway. The sound had wrapped around him like silk, tugging at something deep in his chest that he'd thought long dead. His wolf had gone utterly still, listening, yearning. It disarmed him, every damn time. 3 days ago, he'd opened his larder to find her standing before the nearly empty shelves, those silver eyes taking inventory of his meager supplies. She hadn't said a word, hadn't needed to. Her disappointment had been written in the set of her shoulders, the small frown that creased her brow as she surveyed salt pork that had seen better days and vegetables gone soft with age. The judgment in her silence had stung more than any criticism. He'd left without a word and returned hours later loaded down like a pack mule. Ham, still warm from the smokehouse, wheels of sharp cheese, fresh milk in clay jugs that sloshed with every step, vegetables enough to see them through winter, carrots, potatoes, and kale so fresh they still carried dew. When she'd seen him struggling through the door with his bounty, she had smiled. It had lasted perhaps 3 heartbeats, a soft curve of lips that had stolen the breath from his lungs and left him standing there like a green boy seeing his first sunset. The memory of it haunted him still. That morning she sang, no longer fragments. Real melody, though wordless, high and sweet as summer rain. It drifted from the back hall where she worked, wrapping around him as he stood outside chopping wood for the fire. His wolf paced restless beneath his skin, whining like a lovesick pup. The sound called to him, in the way a male's soul recognized its match. He gave up the pretense and followed the sound. She had her back to him as he reached the doorway, unaware of his presence. Her dark hair, up in a simple knot, revealed the vulnerable curve where neck met shoulder. Her dress was the blue one he'd bought her in the village, modest and practical, but it couldn't hide the feminine grace of her movements. The broom moved in long, rhythmic strokes across the wooden planks. Her voice, barely more than breath, wove around the motion like an ancient spell. There was something hypnotic about it. The rise and fall of the melody, the unconscious sway of her hips as she worked, the way the afternoon light caught in the loose strands of hair that had escaped her careful knot. His hands clenched at his sides. His wolf surged against the barriers of his control, wanting to step forward, to touch, to claim, to bury his face in the curve of her neck and breathe in that intoxicating scent until it was branded on his soul. He should have walked away, should have returned to his chores that kept his mind and hands busy. Instead, he watched. His eyes traced the delicate curve of her spine, the graceful arch of her shoulders, the way the light painted gold across her pale skin. There was nothing deliberately provocative in her movements, nothing calculated or intentional. She was simply herself, unguarded in a way she never was when she knew he was near. It moved him, more than any bold challenge or calculated submission. This glimpse of her when she thought herself alone, when the careful walls she maintained crumbled just enough to let the music through, was devastating. She stopped suddenly, tilted her head like a deer catching an unfamiliar scent. His heart hammered as he realized his mistake. His wolf's attention, focused so intently on her, had been too strong, too predatory. She'd felt his gaze like a physical touch. He stepped back quickly, silently, before she could turn. His chest tight with something that might have been guilt. His throat dry with want he had no right to feel. In the shadows of the doorway, he pressed his back against the stone wall and tried to remember why he'd rejected her in that clearing, why he'd declared her off limits to himself and his pack. The reasons seemed distant now, unimportant, eclipsed by the growing certainty that the broken little Omega he'd claimed as an offering was claiming him in return. Chapter 5. 2 weeks had passed, and he didn't know where it had gone. It felt like she had always been with him, always part of his life. Done with organizing his home, she went to the village. Mylah brought chicken soup to the old mender whose hands shook too badly to lift a ladle. She gestured to torn sleeves and mended them without being asked. Swept porches that weren't hers. Carried water for mothers with babes on their hips. Her help came in careful movements and knowing looks, never words. Brandon watched from the shadows more than he cared to admit. Saw how she approached the wary ones slowly, how she never pushed when they pulled back, how she earned trust the same way she'd earned his, through patience and quiet persistence. By the end of the 3rd week, half the pack had something kind to say about her. The other half had stopped looking at her like she might bolt at any moment. "She's sweet," someone said. "Gentle," said another. "She'd make a fine Luna," whispered a third, quietly, but not quietly enough. He heard it all. She was his, whether she wanted to be or not, whether he wanted her to be or not. And the more she worked, the more he hated seeing the exhaustion in her stance, the smudges on her cheeks, the slowness of her steps. But there was something else. Something that made his jaw clench every time he caught the younger males watching her pass. She was no longer the bone-thin wraith he'd claimed in that clearing. Good food and safety had filled out the sharp angles of hunger. Her skin glowed with health. Her black hair caught sunlight like a raven's wing. She moved differently now, still quiet, still careful. But there was a grace to her steps that spoke of strength returning. Curves that the modest dresses couldn't quite hide. Marcus, one of his lieutenants, had lingered too long outside the baker's shop where she'd been helping, his eyes tracking the sway of her hips as she carried flour sacks, the way her dress pulled tight across her chest when she reached for high shelves. Brandon's wolf had snarled, low and possessive. "You're doing too much," he told her one evening, voice clipped as he met her outside the lodge where she'd just finished scrubbing the stairs. She blinked up at him, sweat on her brow, bucket at her side, those silver eyes wide and questioning. Then she smiled, not out of obedience or mockery, just soft, quiet, unbothered. That smile knocked something loose in his chest. She was healing, growing stronger. And soon, some male would work up the courage to approach him, to ask for her hand, to offer her what he couldn't, a future without the weight of his failures, a chance at happiness with someone who wasn't already broken. The thought made his wolf howl beneath his skin, made fire crawl up his spine and settle in his belly like molten lead. He'd never be ready for that day. Ever. Chapter 6. That evening, she brought him a bowl of stew. The wooden bowl was warm in her hands. Steam rose from the surface, carrying the rich scent of herbs and meat. She'd found his stores of dried rosemary and thyme tucked away in forgotten corners, transformed his meager supplies into something that smelled like home. She set it on the table beside his chair without a word. Her fingers brushed the wood for just a moment, a hesitation that spoke of uncertainty, of hope she was afraid to name. He looked up from the pack reports scattered across his lap, met those silver eyes that seemed to hold entire storms. She stood there, waiting, lingering for a sign that her efforts mattered. He didn't thank her, couldn't. because that would mean acknowledging this soft ache blooming in the center of his ribs, the one that said he was falling, fast and hard. Instead, he lifted the spoon, tasted what she'd made. The broth was perfect, rich and savory, seasoned with a careful hand that spoke of practice, of care. The meat fell apart at the touch of his tongue. The vegetables still held their shape but yielded sweetly. She'd made something beautiful from almost nothing. Her eyes tracked his movements, watched him take another spoonful, then another, waiting for judgment that wouldn't come in words but in whether he finished what she'd offered. A small smile ghosted across her lips when he scraped the bottom of the bowl clean. She reached for it. Her fingers grazed his as she lifted it away. The contact was brief, electric, gone before either could acknowledge it. But she lingered, just for a heartbeat, long enough for him to catch the high, sweet scent of rain-soaked earth, long enough for his wolf to press against his ribs like a caged thing demanding he act, demanding he pull her close and mark her as his, demanding he claim her and ease the fire that burned hotter every day. Then she was gone, padding back to the kitchen on silent feet, leaving him with empty hands and a chest full of feelings he didn't dare name. Later that night, he sat on the back porch, boots off, moonlight catching the runes on his chest and arms. The stars wheeled overhead, distant and cold. He thought about Elena, the first Omega who'd made his heart race, the one who'd promised him everything under those same stars and left him with nothing but a broken betrothal and gutted pride. She'd married a wealthier alpha 3 towns over, sent Brandon a message with no return address. "You're not enough," it read. Not in those words, but close enough. He hadn't loved anyone since. Hadn't wanted to, until silver eyes and wordless songs, until quiet strength that wrapped around his broken places and made them feel whole. He stared up at the constellation his mother had taught him as a boy, the hunter's moon, and found himself wishing, hoping, that maybe she was different, that maybe broken could find broken and make something beautiful, that maybe she'd stay. Chapter 7. She had learned the rhythm of the house, the creak in the hallway floorboards, the exact moment before the kettle whistled, the way Brandon's boots hit the porch when he returned at dusk. 3 slow thuds, then a pause, like he was deciding whether to come in or stay wild a little longer. She had learned him, the man who rarely spoke, but always noticed, the alpha who didn't touch her, but whose presence filled every room like heat from a hearth she wasn't sure she was allowed to sit beside. At first, the cleaning had been about erasure, scrubbing away the phantom weight of her stepmother's voice, the years of being told she was worthless, dirty, a burden no one would ever want. Every surface she made shine was proof otherwise. Every corner she claimed was territory stolen back from that cruel woman's memory. But somewhere between washing windows and mending curtains, it had become something else. A way to stop thinking about the breadth of Brandon's shoulders, the careful way he moved around her, like she might break. The moments when she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't name but felt in her bones. She watched him too, more than she should. Saw how he settled disputes between pack members with reason instead of fear. How he crouched down to the pup's level when they brought him their scraped knees and broken toys. How he pretended to chase them through the village square, stumbling dramatically so they could escape with delighted squeals. This wasn't the monster her stepmother had painted. This was a man who carried the weight of his people's safety and still found time to make children laugh. It made the ache in her chest worse, made her want things she had no right to want. So she worked harder, helped more, let exhaustion chase away the dangerous warmth that bloomed whenever he smiled. The village became her refuge, mending Mrs. Garrett's torn apron, carrying water for the young mothers, sweeping porches that weren't hers because busy hands meant quiet thoughts. It was at the baker's shop, Flower still dusting her sleeves from helping with the morning bread, when Jurgen and Ralph found her. They stood in the doorway like guilty children. Jurgen clutched a small carved wooden bird in his massive hands. Ralph held a bunch of wildflowers that looked absurdly delicate against his scarred knuckles. "Miss Mylah," Jurgen started, then stopped, cleared his throat. We wanted to apologize," Ralph finished. His voice was gentler than she'd expected. "For that first day. For scaring you." She tilted her head, waiting. "Alpha's never had a woman in his home," Jurgen explained, shifting his weight. "Servant, slave, or otherwise. We thought," he grimaced, "battle lust makes fools of us all. We thought you might be Crescent Shadow Pack, come to spy." Ralph stepped forward, offering the flowers. "These are from my garden. Thought you might like them." Jurgen held out the carved bird. "Made this myself. It's a sparrow, like you. Small, fragile." The comparison should have stung. Instead, she found herself touched by the clumsy kindness. She accepted both gifts with a small nod, a smile that said forgiveness without words. "There's the Harvest Moon dance next week," Ralph said, emboldened by her acceptance. Could I have a dance?" "Me too," Jurgen added quickly. "If you're willing. 1 dance each. We promise to behave." She looked between them. These warriors who'd terrified her 3 weeks ago now stood before her like nervous boys asking for favors. Another nod. Gentle. Gracious. They left grinning like they'd conquered kingdoms, but their words echoed as she walked home. Alpha's never had a woman in his home. She thought about that as she prepared dinner, as she swept the floors, as she waited for those familiar boot steps on the porch. What did it mean? That she was the first? That he'd let her stay when he'd never let anyone else close? The questions followed her into the evening, into the kitchen where she found herself baking. Bread, mostly. Flour clung to her hands, smudged her forearms. She didn't mind. There was something grounding in it, kneading, shaping, waiting. Brandon walked in, stripping his jacket off with that same tired sigh he wore like armor. She looked up, smiling faintly. He didn't return it, but he watched her. He always did. His hair was disheveled. A spot of flour somehow dusted his jaw, probably from the air she'd kicked up while working. Without thinking, she stepped toward him, reached up, slowly, gently, and wiped it away with the back of her fingers. His skin was warm, rough with stubble, real in a way that made her chest tight. His eyes caught hers. The room went still. The silence stretched between them, thick with something unspoken and heavy. Not fear, not confusion, but longing. His gaze dropped to her lips, lingered there like a physical touch. He leaned in, just enough for her breath to catch, for her heart to stutter against her ribs, for hope to bloom dangerous and sweet in her chest. His mouth brushed hers, barely a whisper of contact. Soft, tentative. Over before she could respond. Then he froze. His expression closed like a door slamming shut. He stepped back, away from her warmth, away from the promise of something more. He stopped, shook his head. "I shouldn't have." He turned and left the kitchen without another word. Mylah stood there, hands still midair, the warmth of his nearness vanishing like steam. Her lips tingled where his had touched. Her chest ached like something had been opened wide and left empty. She didn't cry. She didn't call after him. She just turned, picked up the mixing bowl, and kept working. But her fingers trembled as she shaped the dough. And when she finally went to bed that night, she touched her lips and wondered if she'd dreamed it all. Chapter 8. The dress wasn't hers. One of the elder women had insisted. A soft plum-colored thing, worn but well-kept, that fit a little too snug in the waist and a little too loose in the shoulders. She almost didn't go. For 3 days, she'd turned it over in her mind. Brandon hadn't asked her. Hadn't forbidden it either. He'd simply said nothing when the elder women talked about alterations and hair ribbons. Nothing. Which left her suspended between wanting and uncertainty. What would she do if he chose to dance with someone else? As alpha, he would have to. There would be expectations, obligations. Pretty she-wolves with bright smiles and easy laughter who knew how to be what a pack needed. The thought made her chest tight, made her wolf whine low and restless. She didn't want to name what she felt when she imagined his hands on another woman's waist. His attention focused somewhere else, but it burned like acid in her throat. Love. The word whispered through her mind before she could stop it. Dangerous and terrifying and undeniably true. She loved him. Loved the way he settled disputes with patience instead of force. Loved how he pretended to stumble when chasing pups. Loved the careful distance he kept from her because he thought she deserved better. She loved his broken edges and his quiet strength. Loved that he'd given her a home when she'd had nothing. Loved that he watched her like she was something precious he was afraid to touch. The realization should have sent her running. Instead, it made her want to fight. So she went. The lodge was glowing with lanterns and laughter. Music drifted through the open doors, warm and alive. Couples spun across the wooden floor while children danced in circles, and older wolves stood in quiet clusters, sipping cider and watching everything with knowing eyes. Mylah stepped inside, heart pounding louder than the drumline. She didn't expect the hush. It wasn't silence, not exactly. Just a ripple. Eyes turning, conversations halting for a breath. Then someone smiled. Another nodded. A few stepped aside to let her pass. The pack welcomed her. It shouldn't have made her throat tighten, but it did. Jurgen found her first, then Ralph, then a parade of males who seemed determined to keep her feet moving. She danced until her cheeks flushed, until her hair came loose from its careful pins, until the room felt too warm and too loud. She needed air, space, a moment to breathe. Behind a tall potted fern near the windows, she finally found respite. Hidden in the shadows, she searched the crowd for Brandon. She hadn't seen him yet, hadn't felt those dark eyes tracking her movements like they did at home. Maybe he hadn't come. Maybe he was avoiding her. Maybe that kiss in the kitchen had been a mistake he regretted. I just hope he finds someone soon. The voice drifted from the other side of the plant. 2 she-wolves, talking in the low tones women used for secrets. Mylah froze. It's been years since Elena, the first continued. That Omega broke his heart something fierce. Ran off with that wealthy alpha from Creek Ridge, didn't she? Left Brandon with nothing but a cold letter. He deserves better. Deserves someone who sees what we all see, that he's worth more than gold or status. What about the new girl? Mylah? A pause, thoughtful. She's sweet, gentle, and he watches her like she hung the moon. But she's so quiet, so small. We need a Luna who's fierce as Brandon is, someone who can help him rule. Can you imagine her facing down a challenge, standing up to rival packs? Maybe not. But the way he looks at her, Looking isn't enough. The pack needs strength, needs a voice that can be heard. Their conversation faded as they moved away, but their words echoed in Mylah's chest like blows. Small, quiet, not fierce enough. Everything her stepmother had said. Everything she'd tried to scrub away with soap and determination. She slipped out the side door into the garden. Cool air hit her flushed cheeks. Stars wheeled overhead, bright and distant. She was small. She was quiet. But she wasn't weak. Hiding? Brandon's voice made her jump. He stepped from the shadows near the garden wall, moonlight catching the sharp planes of his face. He moved closer, close enough that she caught his scent, pine and leather and something uniquely him. You've been dancing all night. His voice held something she couldn't identify. Every male in there has had their turn. Was that jealousy? The possibility made her pulse skip. She gestured toward the lodge, a small shrug that said they had asked, so she had danced. And if I asked you? The question hung between them like a challenge, like a promise. She nodded. He held out his hand. No music reached them here, just the whisper of wind through leaves and the distant sound of laughter from inside. But when he pulled her close, when his arms came around her like they belonged there, nothing else mattered. They moved together in the moonlight. Slow. Sure. Like they'd done this 1,000 times before. Show me, he whispered against her hair. She tilted her head, questioning. Your wolf. Let me see her. The request should have frightened her. Her wolf was shy, but fierce. Everything those women had said she wasn't. But Brandon's hands were steady on her waist. His voice held no demand, only invitation. She closed her eyes. Let the change take her. Her wolf was smaller than most, silver white fur that caught moonlight like water, but she stood proud in Brandon's shadow, unafraid. His wolf emerged to meet hers. Massive, dark as midnight, beautiful in his controlled power. They circled each other in the garden, a dance older than words. When his wolf touched his nose to hers, gentle as a blessing, something settled in her chest. When they shifted back, she was pressed against his chest, his arms tight around her like he never wanted to let go. Moonlight painted her skin silver, made her look like something from a dream, something too precious for this world. He should have looked away, should have given her privacy, but she didn't pull back, didn't cover herself or turn away in shame. Instead, she reached up, touched his face. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw as she shook her head slowly, a gentle condemnation of the woman who'd left him. His body went still. You heard? She nodded, her eyes fierce in the moonlight. Her hand moved to rest over his heart, then to her own, pointing between them, choosing this, choosing him. And me? I'm who you truly want? The question was raw, vulnerable. It cracked something open in his chest. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she took his hand, placed it over her heart so he could feel how it raced for him, brought his other hand to her lips, pressed a soft kiss to his palm, a promise without words. Always. Him. Only him. The gesture shattered something inside him. For years, he'd been the one doing the choosing, the one offering protection, shelter, leadership, always giving, always responsible for someone else's well-being. But here she was, this woman who'd been broken and discarded, choosing him back, not because she needed his strength or his pack or his home, but because she wanted Brandon, just Brandon, the alpha who tried too hard, who carried too much weight. who'd been deemed not enough by someone who was supposed to love him. She was choosing the man Elena had walked away from, the one who'd spent years believing he wasn't worth staying for. His throat closed. His chest felt too tight to breathe. No one had ever chosen him before. Not really. They'd chosen his title, his power, his ability to provide, but never just him. His mouth was on hers then, desperate, grateful, a claiming that spoke of possession and promise and everything he'd been denying himself. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he guided her deeper into the garden, past the cultivated beds to where wild roses climbed an old stone wall, where shadows pooled thick and private. Her back met the cool stone. His hands braced on either side of her head. "Tell me to stop," he whispered against her throat. "Tell me this isn't what you want." But she arched into him instead, her hands threading through his hair, her mouth finding his pulse point and pressing soft kisses there. He groaned, low and desperate. "Mylah." She smiled against his skin, the first real smile he'd ever seen from her, and in that hidden corner of the garden, under the harvest moon, she showed him exactly what she wanted. No words needed, just touch, just breath, just the ancient dance of two souls finding home in each other. When he lifted her against the wall, when she wrapped her legs around his waist, when they moved together like they'd been made for this moment, it felt like claiming, like choosing, like everything he'd been waiting for without knowing he was waiting. "Mine," he whispered against her throat. She nodded, her fingers digging into his shoulders, her answer written in the way she held him, the way she moved with him. But even as he claimed her, even as she gave herself completely, he knew the truth. She'd chosen him first, and that made all the difference. Chapter 9. A month had passed since the harvest moon. A month of mornings that began with Mylah's soft breathing against his chest, and evenings that ended with her fingers tracing patterns on his skin. A month of helping rebuild the miller's roof together, of watching her coax smiles from the village children, of falling asleep to the sound of her heartbeat. A month of pretending he didn't see the question growing in her eyes. It was there again today as they walked back from the Hendersons' farm, where they'd helped deliver a difficult foal. Mylah had been gentle with the mare, patient and sure-handed, and old Henderson had looked at Brandon with the kind of knowing smile that said he saw what everyone else saw. A perfect Luna. But perfection was the problem, wasn't it? She was everything he didn't deserve, everything Elena had convinced him he'd never be worthy of. The question flickered across Mylah's face as they reached the porch steps, quick, hopeful, then carefully hidden when she caught him watching. "When will you make me yours? Completely?" He knew what she was asking. The pact ceremony, the formal claiming, the binding that would make her Luna in truth, not just in his heart. His wolf snarled at the delay, wanted to claim her completely, mark her, make it so no other male would ever look at her and wonder. But the man remembered what he'd become after Elena left, how he'd let bloodlust replace diplomacy, how he'd neglected his people, his home, his responsibilities, how he'd become something dark and bitter and unworthy of the trust his pack placed in him. He'd clawed his way back, built himself into something better. But what if it wasn't enough? What if the darkness was still there, waiting? What if he bound Mylah to him only to become the monster again? She deserved better than his uncertainty, deserved a mate who was whole. He would give his life for her, that he knew without question, had known it since that first night she'd trembled in his kitchen. But giving his life was easy compared to trusting himself with hers. So he said nothing, kissed her forehead, led her inside where dinner waited and the fire crackled warm and safe. where he could pretend the question in her eyes didn't cut him deeper every day. 3 days later, the letter arrived. Marcus, his second, brought it during the morning meal. Official pack business, delivered by courier from the Creek Ridge pack. Elena's pack. Brandon's blood turned to ice when he saw her alpha husband's mark pressed into red wax. Mylah's eyes found his, a silent question in their depths as she gestured toward the letter. He broke the seal with hands that barely trembled, read the formal script, the polite invitation. "A mating ceremony," he said finally. "Alpha Donovan's nephew. They're extending courtesy invitations to neighboring packs." But that wasn't all. There was a personal note. Elena's handwriting, still familiar after all these years. "Brandon, I heard about your new wolf. She seems lovely. I hope you'll both attend. It would mean a great deal to see you happy. E." The words blurred, not because they hurt, they didn't, not anymore, but because of what they meant. What Elena was offering. Closure. Public acknowledgement that he'd moved on, that he was worthy of happiness, that Mylah was worth celebrating. "We should go," he said. The words were out before he could stop them, before he could think about what he was asking. Mylah went still beside him. Her lips parted slightly, as if to speak, but no sound came. Her hand moved to her throat. A gesture he'd learned meant confusion, uncertainty. It would be diplomatic. Showpack unity. Elena and I. He stumbled over the explanation. "We should prove there's no animosity." Which was true. All of it. True. But not the whole truth. The whole truth was that he needed to see Elena again. Needed to know for certain that the hold she'd had over him was truly broken. That he could stand in the same room with her and feel nothing but indifference. That he was finally free to give Mylah everything she deserved. But Mylah didn't know that. Couldn't understand why he'd want to see the woman who'd shattered him. She nodded slowly. A careful, controlled movement that somehow conveyed resignation more clearly than words ever could. But something had shifted in her posture. Something careful and distant and wrong. "Mylah." She stood abruptly, pointed toward the kitchen with movements that were just a little too quick, a little too controlled. He followed, found her at the sink, hands braced against the edge, shoulders rigid. He could see her reflection in the window above the sink, the tight line of her mouth, the way she held herself like she was trying not to break. She turned then, and the pain in her eyes hit him like a physical blow. Her hand pressed flat against her chest, then gestured toward him. Then to the letter he still held. "You want to see her." It wasn't a question. The tilt of her head, the arch of her brow, the way her fingers curled into her palm, all of it clearly spelled out her understanding. "I want closure," he said carefully. "There's a difference." Her shoulders lifted in a bitter shrug. Her eyes said, "Is there?" while her voice couldn't, because a month ago he couldn't bear to hear Elena's name. Now he wanted to attend her pack's celebration. With her. "I want you with me because," he faltered, unable to say the words branded on his heart. She stepped closer. Her hand reached up, touched his face with trembling fingers. Her eyes searched his, desperate and pleading. "What am I to you?" The question was written in every line of her body, in the way she held her breath, in the way her fingers lingered on his skin like she was memorizing the feel of him. "Everything," he wanted to say. "My heart, my home, my reason for breathing." But the words stuck in his throat, because saying them meant binding himself to her, meant trusting that he wouldn't destroy what they had, the way he'd destroyed everything else. His silence stretched between them. The light went out of her eyes, like a candle snuffed, like hope, dying. Her hand dropped from his face. She stepped back, nodded once, sharp and final, saying with her eyes, "I see. Mylah, that's not—" But she was already moving, collecting her shawl from the hook by the door. Her movements, methodical, purposeful. The way she'd moved those first weeks, when she'd been afraid to take up space. She paused at the door, looked back at him with eyes that had gone carefully blank, pointed to herself, then toward the village, then back to him in the kitchen, telling him without words, "I'll visit Sarah tonight. You can make your own dinner." She moved past him then, not running, not dramatic, just leaving, and Brandon stood in his kitchen, holding a letter from his past, watching his future walk away. He'd wanted to protect her, wanted to be worthy before he claimed her completely. Instead, he'd made her doubt she was worthy of being claimed at all. The question in her eyes was gone, replaced by something infinitely worse: resignation. And he knew, with the bitter clarity that came too late, that this rift between them couldn't be healed with words alone. He'd broken something precious with his silence, his hesitation, her trust. And trust, once broken, required more than explanations to repair. It required proof. Chapter 10. The Creek Ridge pack house sprawled like a monument to excess. Crystal chandeliers dripped from every ceiling, their light catching on jeweled gowns and polished silver. Everything gleamed. Everything sparkled. Everything felt cold. Mylah smoothed her simple blue dress, the nicest she owned, and tried not to feel like a sparrow among peacocks. Around her, laughter tinkled like breaking glass, sharp and brittle. Conversations died as eyes tracked her movement, dissecting, cataloging, finding her wanting. She'd endured worse scrutiny, survived it, but this felt different. Here, she wasn't just the broken wolf seeking shelter. She was Brandon's, what? Companion? Pet project? The question that had haunted her for days pressed against her ribs like a physical ache. "Brandon! How wonderful to see you." The voice was honey over steel. Mylah turned to see a woman gliding toward them, all golden hair and practiced grace, beautiful in the way that came from perfect bones and careful maintenance. Elena? Even without introductions, Mylah knew. This was the woman who'd owned Brandon's heart, who'd deemed him not enough and walked away. Elena. Brandon's voice was carefully neutral, but Mylah felt the tension that ran through his frame like a struck wire. "And you must be Mylah." Elena's smile was warm, genuine even. "I've heard such lovely things. Welcome to Creek Ridge." A man appeared at Elena's elbow, tall, broad, with the kind of confidence that came from never being denied anything, never being told the word no. His hand settled on Elena's shoulder with casual possession. "Donovan," he said, not bothering with pleasantries, "and you are the Blackwood Alpha." His eyes swept over Mylah with polite disinterest before fixing on Brandon. "Heard you've expanded your pack recently. Always good to see strong alphas taking in those who need guidance." The words were carefully neutral, diplomatically phrased, but his grip on Elena's shoulder told a different story. "David, you remember I mentioned the wedding flowers need—" Elena began softly. "Elena." His voice cut across hers like a warm knife through butter. "The adults are talking." The dismissal was casual, practiced, the kind of cruelty that came wrapped in reasonableness. Elena's face went carefully blank. Of course. Forgive me. Though I suppose, David continued, his attention back on Brandon, his fingers digging deeper into Elena's shoulder, some women do need firmer guidance than others. Elena here used to have such strong opinions about everything, didn't you, darling? His tone was indulgent, patronizing, the way one might speak to a child who'd finally learned to behave. Elena's smile was practiced perfection. I've learned to trust your judgment, David. You're so much wiser about these things. The words made Mylah's stomach turn. This confident, beautiful woman reduced to simpering agreement with a man who treated her like a pet who'd finally learned tricks. Brandon went rigid beside Mylah. Every muscle in his body coiled for violence. Mylah touched his arm gently, a subtle warning that said, "Not here. Not your fight." But the damage was done in her heart. Even after all this time, seeing Elena hurt still affected him, still mattered. Elena would always be the woman he'd loved first, the one he'd wanted to protect. Mylah was just the one he'd settled for. The ceremony passed in a blur of vows and tears and forced smiles. Mylah sat in the back, watching Brandon's profile as he watched the happy young couple exchange marks, something she and Brandon would never do. The reception was twice as bad as the ceremony. She found herself alone at a corner table, watching couples dance while Brandon networked with neighboring alphas, doing his duty, playing his part, just like she was playing hers. The perfect, grateful, rescued wolf, silent, undemanding, so very appreciative of the scraps of attention thrown her way. The thought made her sick. A group of women at the next table whispered behind painted fans, their words carrying clearly in the acoustics of the grand ballroom. Heard she was found half dead in the forest. Can't even speak, apparently. Convenient, really. What man doesn't want a woman who can't argue? Though I suppose even Brandon Blackwood has to take what he can get after Elena. Their laughter was like acid in her ears. Mylah stared down at her hands, at the calluses from honest work, at the small scars that told the story of survival. All her life she'd let hurtful words define her, let shame shrink her into something small and grateful and forgettable. But as she sat in this glittering tomb of a ballroom, watching Elena diminish herself for a man who didn't deserve her breath, something crystallized in Mylah's chest. She wasn't grateful anymore. She was furious. Brandon's attention, his care, his protection, his passion had given her something precious, not worthiness. She'd always had that. He'd given her the space to remember it, and she was done pretending otherwise. Done sitting silent while others decided her value. Done waiting for someone else to choose her when she could choose herself. The gossiping women fell silent as she stood, as she walked past their table with her head high and her shoulders back. She found Brandon near the terrace doors, deep in conversation with two other alphas. He looked up as she approached, something shifting in his expression at whatever he saw in her face. "Excuse me," she said, her voice rusty from disuse but clear, strong. The alphas turned, surprise flickering across their features. Brandon went very still. "I need to speak with you," she continued, each word deliberate, certain. One of the alphas, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, smiled. "Of course. We were just finishing." "No." Mylah's gaze never left Brandon's face. "I need to speak with Alpha Brandon. Alone. Now." The authority in her voice made them step back, made Brandon's eyes widen. She turned and walked toward the terrace doors, not waiting to see if he followed. But she heard his footsteps behind her, felt his presence like warmth at her back. The terrace was mercifully empty. the night air cool against her flushed cheeks. She walked to the stone railing and gripped it with both hands, gathering her courage. "Mylah, I'm leaving." The words came out steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "Tonight, after this is over." "What?" His voice cracked. "Why?" She turned to face him then. This man who'd saved her, sheltered her, made her remember what it felt like to be touched with reverence instead of violence. "Because I deserve better than being someone's consolation prize." His face went pale. "That's not... isn't it?" Her voice grew stronger with each word. "You can't even claim me properly. Can't make me your mate, but you'll bring me here to watch you mourn another woman." "I'm not mourning. You went rigid when that bastard hurt her." The words tumbled out now, years of silence breaking like a dam. "You wanted to protect her. Still. Always." He shook his head, dark hair falling in his eyes. "No, I want to protect you." "From what? The truth?" She laughed, and the sound held no humor. "I know what I am to you, Brandon. I've always known. I'm the safe choice, the grateful one, the one who won't leave because I have nowhere else to go." "That's not true." "Then prove it." The challenge hung between them like a blade. "Tell me what I am to you." "Not what I could be. Not what you want me to be. What I am. Right now. Today." He opened his mouth, closed it. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. And in that silence, Mylah found her answer. "I thought so." She turned back toward the ballroom. "I'll be gone by morning." "Don't try to stop me." "Mylah, wait." But she was already moving, already done. She'd found her voice. Now she needed to find herself. The ballroom felt different when she stepped back inside. Smaller somehow. Less significant. She moved through the crowd with purpose, heading for the exit. She'd made it halfway across the dance floor when she noticed Brandon wasn't behind her anymore. The realization made her steps falter, but she pressed forward. She was done waiting. Done hoping. Then the music stopped. Not the natural end of a song, but an abrupt halt that left notes hanging in the air like unfinished thoughts. The sudden silence was jarring. Conversations died as heads turned toward the small stage where the minstrels had been playing. Brandon stood there, no longer in pursuit of her, but commanding the space. The lead musician stepped aside with a knowing smile, as if this interruption had been planned. Expected. "Excuse me." Brandon's voice carried across the room, strong and clear without need for amplification. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have something to say." Every eye in the room fixed on him, including Elena's, from her place at the head table beside her scowling husband, including Mylah's, from where she stood frozen in the middle of the dance floor, understanding beginning to dawn. The minstrels exchanged glances. The lute player's fingers found his strings, plucking out the opening notes of an ancient ballad, one that spoke of lost love found again, of hearts that chose each other across impossible odds. "A month ago," Brandon continued, his gaze finding hers across the crowded room as the gentle melody swelled beneath his words, "I told myself I wasn't ready to claim my mate, that I needed to be worthy of her first." The music built slowly, other instruments joining the lute, flute and fiddle weaving together like a promise made in song. This wasn't spontaneous. This was orchestrated, planned. He had known she would try to leave, and he had been ready. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mylah's heart stopped beating. "I was wrong." His voice grew stronger, more certain. "I wasn't protecting her. I was protecting myself. from the fear that she might leave, that she might decide I wasn't enough. He stepped down from the stage, moving through the parting crowd with predatory grace, moving toward her. She may not know it, but she taught me something. He was closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. Worthy isn't something you become. It's something you choose to be. The crowd fell away. The glittering ballroom faded. There was only Brandon, standing before her with his heart in his eyes. "Mylah," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent room, "you are not my consolation prize. You are not my safe choice. You are not the woman I settled for." He dropped to one knee, there in the middle of the dance floor, surrounded by the pack that had dismissed her as broken. "You are the woman who saved me, who made me remember what it means to lead with compassion instead of fear, who showed me that strength comes in many forms, and the strongest among us are often the quietest." Tears blurred her vision. Her hands flew to her mouth. "You are my mate, my Luna, my heart outside my body." His voice broke slightly. "And if you'll have me, all of me, including the parts that are still healing, I want to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of the gift you've given me." "Your voice," he whispered, for her ears alone. "Your trust. Your love." The silence stretched. Mylah was dimly aware of the crowd holding its breath, of Elena's hand pressed to her chest, tears streaming down her face, of her husband's scowl deepening. But all of that faded as she looked down at the man kneeling before her, the man who'd just claimed her in front of everyone who'd ever dismissed her, who'd chosen her when she'd been ready to walk away. "Yes," she whispered, the word barely audible. His face transformed, relief and joy and love so bright it hurt to look at. "Yes," she said again, stronger now, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "Yes, I'll have you. All of you." He surged to his feet, capturing her face in his hands, kissing her with a desperation that spoke of almost losing everything that mattered. The ballroom erupted. Applause and cheers and the kind of genuine joy that had been missing from the evening's festivities. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Brandon rested his forehead against hers. "1 week," he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Our mating ceremony. Everyone's invited." More cheers, more applause. But Mylah only had eyes for the man before her, the man who'd chosen her when it mattered most, who'd given her back her voice. From across the room, she caught Elena's eye. The other woman's face was wet with tears, but she was smiling. A real smile. Sad but genuine. She mouthed something that looked like, "Be happy." And Mylah knew she would be. She'd found her voice, and she was ready to use it. Thank you for listening to Muted Heart. If this story of Mylah and Brandon touched your heart, we would be absolutely thrilled if you could take a moment to leave a comment letting us know what you thought. Did their journey from silence to love resonate with you? Which moment made your heart flutter the most? Your comments truly mean the world to us and help other listeners discover these stories that celebrate the quiet strength found in love's gentle power. If you enjoyed Mylah's transformation from a broken, silent wolf to a woman who found her voice and her worth, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Romance Audiobooks-Love. Your support helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you more enchanting tales of love, healing, and happily ever afters. And if you know someone who loves paranormal romance, werewolf stories, or tales of second chances, please share this with them. Love stories are always better when shared. Thank you again for joining us on this journey. Until next time, May you always remember that the most powerful voices are sometimes the ones that speak from the heart without saying a word. Sweet dreams and happy listening.